Everyone tells you it's lonely at the top, but nobody tells you something more unsettling, that you often have to choose to be lonely just to get there. To reach peak performance, you must brutally prune your social circle, trade shallow validation for the isolation of mastery. And then the question arrives, quiet and sharp. Is your success worth the silence? Because what if the ultimate price of your greatest achievement isn't the hard work, but the solitude that follows it? As you ascend the hierarchy of excellence, the distance between you and the world grows until it becomes a bridge no one else can cross. Tonight, we dissect that distance, not to glorify isolation, not to romanticize suffering, but to understand a Stoic truth. Solitude is often the tax paid by those who refuse to live casually. Success has a shape, a pyramid. At the bottom are the many, the 90%, the everyday rhythms of comfort, routine, distraction. But as you climb, as your standards rise, your discipline sharpens, your pace accelerates, the number of people who can relate to your life naturally shrinks. This is not personal, it is mathematical. To move from the bottom 90% into the top 10, then the top 5, then the top 1, is to enter a thinner atmosphere. Fewer peers, fewer mirrors, fewer people who understand your decisions. Then comes the divergence point. The moment your growth rate outpaces the comfort zone of your original circle. You change what you tolerate, what you find entertaining. You stop feeding habits that once made you fun. Most people don't interpret evolution as evolution. They interpret it as arrogance. You've changed. You think you're better. You're too serious now. But what they often mean is, your discipline reminds me of my avoidance. So a barrier forms. Not because you built a wall, but because the crowd can no longer follow your altitude.
Success changes your language. Your conversations shift. You start thinking in long timelines, speaking about strategy, execution, sacrifice, systems. But many social circles are built on a different glue: gossip, entertainment, complaining, small talk that fills silence. When you stop participating in that glue, the bond weakens, not because you dislike people, but because the shared ritual disappears. And here is the brutal part. Sometimes the very habits you must remove to grow are the same habits that keep you connected to certain people. Late nights that steal your mornings, drinking that dulls your focus, constant social availability that erases deep work. The pruning process creates friction, and the psychological toll is real. You realize some people loved the version of you that stayed small enough to remain familiar. Those who knew you before your success may not recognize the person you've become, and you may not recognize yourself either. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we must be willing to discard what no longer serves virtue. But discarding is always a form of grief, even when it's necessary. There is another kind of loneliness that success creates, a resonance gap. Your problems become high stakes. Your decisions carry weight, the margin for error becomes thinner, and suddenly the everyday complaints of the majority feel distant, not because you are superior, but because your world demands a different kind of attention. You can't always explain what you're building, not because you're secretive, but because it takes too long to translate a vision to someone who has never walked your path. This is the silence of leadership. External validation cannot be your fuel anymore, because the people around you may not see the vision, and if you need them to see it before you act, you will never build anything exceptional. So you learn to carry your ambition quietly. And here is the paradox. You can be surrounded by people in your professional life and still feel misunderstood personally, praised for results, but rarely seen for the cost, respected for output, but not held in your private exhaustion. Seneca warned that fame can isolate the spirit because it places you in a position where you are watched, but not known. And to be watched without being known is its own kind of loneliness. Stoicism does not worship loneliness, but it understands solitude. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection. Solitude is the environment where mastery grows. And for elite performance, solitude is often necessary, because deep work requires silence. Craft requires uninterrupted attention. Excellence demands focus that most people cannot tolerate. When social noise is reduced, something forms, an internal compass. You begin to hear yourself again. You stop being swayed by public opinion, trends, the emotional weather of the crowd. Epictetus taught that the person who is dependent on applause is a slave, because their peace is owned by others. Solitude breaks that dependency. It teaches you to stand on internal validation. I did the work. I kept my word. I acted with discipline. In that quiet, intuition sharpens. You notice what others miss because they are too distracted. You make decisions others avoid because they cannot sit alone with uncertainty. This is why solitude becomes an advantage. It removes the constant negotiation with other people's expectations. It returns your time to you. It returns your mind to you. And that is where mastery is forged. But solitude is not the final destination. Stoicism does not ask you to become isolated. It asks you to become selective. The goal is not to have no one. The goal is to stop surrounding yourself with people who pull you away from your highest self. As you rise, the architecture of connection changes. You move from many acquaintances to a few mission-aligned alliances. Fewer people, but deeper relationships. Not social noise, but shared values. Not constant contact, but mutual respect. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop seeking applause from people who don't understand your pace. And in doing so, you find peace within the silence, because you realize the internal reward of excellence outweighs the external noise of the crowd. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the approval of others is unstable, but the approval of your own conscience is solid ground. Success creates distance, but that distance is not always loss. Sometimes it is measurement, a measurement of how far you have climbed toward your potential. If you want to occupy the top 1%, your peer group will shrink. This is not tragedy. This is reality. The most successful version of you is often the most lonely one, because exceptionalism requires a life most people won't choose. Standards others call extreme. Patience others call boring. Discipline others call obsessive. And yes, the silence can be heavy. But it is also sacred, because within that silence you are building something real. So don't fear the distance. Don't mistake it for failure. Sometimes the loneliness you feel is not a sign that you are losing your life. It is proof that you are outgrowing your old one. And when you finally make peace with that, you stop grieving the crowd and start honoring the climb.